Hey everyone, welcome to the show.
Welcome.
Today on the show, we're going to talk about the 1994 cult classic and one of Cathy's favorite old movies, Brainscan.
It gets a half a star on Rotten Tomatoes.
What?
Yeah,
Okay.
it gets a half a star.
I don't know why. I thought it was fun.
It's a fun movie. So for those of you who haven't seen it, it's I'll give you just the quick synopsis. So horror films and computer games fascinate teenager Michael, played by Edward Furlong, and a CD-ROM that portrays murder from the killer's point of view combines these interests. The first time Michael plays it, he kills a stranger and cuts off a foot, thinking the events take place in virtual reality. But the next day, Michael finds a foot in his refrigerator, and cyber ghoul Trickster, played by T. Ryder Smith, emerges from the program and forces him to keep playing and to continue committing violent crimes. So this was released in 1994. So directed by John Flynn, written by Brian Owens and Andrew Kevin Walker, stars Edward Furlong, Frank Langella, T. Ryder Smith. It's known as a horror sci-fi. You know,
a slasher and a comedy, right? I mean,
it's all.
And the first video game horror.
Yeah, so I'll talk about the relevancy of that in a moment, but this was at a time I was actually working at a movie theater at this time, and I was so excited for this to come out. And this was back when you would have, if you worked at the theaters, I don't know if they do this anymore, but they would have promotional pins that the staff would get. And I was so excited when they did Brainscan ones, because this is Edward Furlong coming off of Terminator 2, Pet Sematary 2. He was really at the height, and I just loved him, probably because he kind of looked like a lesbian when he was younger and sort of spoke like one too. Yeah. But I had such a crush on him, and I just thought like his movies were so much fun, and I was so excited for this to come out. And I was working in the movie theater at the time. So obviously some of this, like for all of us with, you know, past horror, is much of it is nostalgia. However, when I watch it still, I watched it just about 3 weeks ago, and I was like, I still love this movie. If you just go into it going, just have fun with it.
So that's why we call it a cult movie, because it's old enough to be that, right?
Right.
It's campy. It's ridiculous. It also is in a time when like Freddy Krueger and all of that, right? Like the campy villain who's like snarky and funny and is kind of the shadow daddy, you know,
Yeah.
like that kind of funny psychopathic villain that's in your head or driving your actions. I don't know. Like that's a trope that we were enjoying at the time.
Well, and I'll get into to Trickster, played by T. Ryder Smith, in a moment, but I just want to also let you know that I am a little bit insane about this being like one of my favorite cult films. And about a month ago, I went onto eBay and found the issue of Fangoria that Brainscan was the cover. And Trickster's on the cover of the Fangoria magazine, which is really fun. And then you open it up and there's like, you know, a really long article on it and all the practicals and stuff, because it was the way that the movie was promoted. People thought for sure that it was going to be really cool. But that was not at all what the critics found. So looking up some of the articles about it being a cult film, you know, one of the things that Shannon was just talking about is that the film is a true 90s gaming culture movie. And this is when video games started to become, they weren't nearly as sophisticated as they are now, but this was ahead of its time and showing the immersion of how gaming was going to become a lot like virtual reality, which we now see the gaming culture turning into. And a lot of people are really into VR. And even when you play like Xbox or PlayStation now, the effects and all that, you feel like you're really in it, right? Now you can play with your headset and play with someone in another state and all this. This was well before that and really set that culture of like video games becoming this truly immersive experience. So in that way, it was sort of the leading film that used gaming in horror. I don't remember anything like this. Maybe some sci-fi before, but
War Games or something.
Yeah, something like that. Starman, like some of those, right? But those weren't really about the game as much as this was.
Yep.
And then I also think that T. Ryder Smith who plays Trickster, was really a fun villain. And if given the right film, that character, I believe, could have had a franchise because he was pretty scary.
They were setting it up for that.
Yeah.
I would imagine because it was not critically received well that,
No, and it had enough of a budget. They had, Primus was on the soundtrack.
I noticed that.
And I'm like, okay,
oh, hey.
There's a decent budget here. So here's a couple of quotes that come out of when I went online to see what people were saying. So Brainscan is a slimy love letter to lurid 90s horror that savagely satirizes society's deepening dependency on escapist tech and warped virtual fantasies. Furlong plays a horror-obsessed loner who gets sucked into a demonic CD-ROM game orchestrated by the cackling digital demon Trickster, who goads our hero into carrying out a series of depraved acts in the real world. And this was said by Richard Wells, Brainscan, the outrageously fun 90s cult gem that predicted our dark future. So there's a lot of commentary on how this movie partially didn't do well because it's actually more relatable now. And we've seen this with movies like Jennifer's Body, and Diablo Cody has even said in Fangoria magazines how, like, if she would have made Jennifer's Body now, it would have had a very, very different, it would have been received differently. I do think this movie was just made well before people understood what gaming culture was.
Because it was the first.
It was the first.
So everybody was like, what is this?
Yeah, and so they go on, prophetic satire amidst the slapstick. So on a surface level, Brainscan is definitely top tier splat stick. So it's like a splatter. Yeah, splatter film, slapstick. A delirious orgy of grotesque practical effects and morbid humor that harkens back to horror's no-holds-barred prime before the genre got neutered by corporate oversight. I love this so much because to me, this was the horror, this type of genre or subgenre is what made me fall in love with horror, and how I love that thought. That's very deliberate, like the idea that horror films, we now just like pump them out like nothing. And I was reading something recently where they're saying how horror is, for a while there, it was like, there's like this, U-shaped curve or bell-shaped curve where it's like horror was going up and up and up and up and up, and it was gaining all of this momentum and people were having all this respect for horror coming back. And now it's become this puppy mill. And now it's starting to go back down again. And it's partially because we have these really large corporate, movie companies that are like, yeah, just buy that and redo it. And just do this over here. Where a movie like this was like well before anybody was able to come in and be like, no, that's going to be stupid. We're not going to do that. We're going to do this big budget. So this was one of the last, I think. The movie was a social commentary about how the virtual world strips us of our humanity. So in that way, again, it was also ahead of its time. And like you and I were just saying, in many ways, it was one of the first films that really do that. I think the movie still holds up regarding makeup and digital effects, considering this was 1994. His phone in his bedroom, it was like that, he would say dial such and such, like we do with Siri now.
Yeah.
And the Igor guy that was on that, that's actually T. Ryder's voice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
So he did the voice of Igor, which was supposed to be like a Boris Karloff reference, I think. And then, it remains one of what's interesting is as poorly as it did, it remains one of the best cult hits of the 90s when you look back and people start to rate these, and I was going on some of these platforms and people were like, I loved this movie. So it's so surprising to me how it got knocked. And it was unapologetic and I think reflected the end of, edgy and irresponsible horror before the genre became overproduced. So you saw it.
I did. I want to do some
Brainscan Facts with a girl.
Before we get too much farther into this, I want to do some Brainscan Horror Facts with Cath.
Here's number one. Director John Flynn was not a fan of Edward Furlong. What was his biggest complaint?
Okay.
Number two. The film is originally based on a computer game by the name of what? I'm going to give you three options. Is it Brain Dead, Brain Waves, or Brain Dance?
All right.
Number 3, the film was such a critical and financial failure. How long did it last in the theater?
Oh, boy. You would know that because you were working there, too.
Yep. Number 4, the film clips used to represent the fictitious film Death. And I love when he goes, part 2. The film being shown in Michael Brower's horror club are from what they're from what real film? Okay. What's the name of the real film? Got it. And then number 5, how old was Jamie Galen, who played the role of 15-year-old Kyle in the film?
Oh, like how was he?
Was
really?
he in real life? Yeah, the actor. Yeah.
All right.
So yeah, tell me what you thought about this movie.
I enjoyed it. You know, I don't know if I'm sure I saw it back in the day, but it wasn't one of those things that I had watched 100 times. So when I sat down to watch it, it was kind of fun because I didn't really know what was going to happen. I mean, I had seen the pictures. I remember it kind of vaguely, but I didn't remember anything about the plot or anything about what was going to happen. And so I thought I enjoyed it. Like, I enjoyed the campy comedy silliness of that era of filmmaking with that kind of Freddy Krueger-esque, you know, villain. I enjoy that now in my horror watching because I know what it is. I know the period of time they were making that. I go into it knowing that that's what's going to happen. I'm very aware and familiar with what was going on in like sitcoms in the 90s and the different things that were happening in the mid to late 90s. And so it's congruent with what was going on. And so I enjoyed it for that reason. I thought he was ridiculous and funny, and Edward Furlong was also ridiculous in a different way.
Yeah.
And so it's just fun to revisit all of that. And I felt like it clipped along. I read this one review that I'll mention for Bloody Disgusting, and the article is called Brainscan. This nostalgic 90s gem doubles as a waking nightmare. So there's that Freddy Krueger analogy, right? But I wanted to read, it says, all in all, Brainscan's a lot of things. In one moment, it has a suburban trappings of Wes Craven's Scream.
Yes.
And the next, the wacky tone of Wes Craven's Shocker.
Yes.
So I thought that was a good distillation of what you're in for. And they also talk about that the tonal shift is why it is so overlooked and disregarded by critics. And it says the film sits with a lowly 13% rotten score on aggregate site Rotten Tomatoes, but has also become a cult classic because it boasts a 60% fresh audience score among horror fans. The film juggles true dread in one hand and a coming-of-age story featuring a larger-than-life monster dude in the other. And it says, Brainscan is a bit messy in the organization of its tones and admittedly loses some steam by the third act, but one thing you could never call it is forgettable. And then they talk about really succinctly that like there's a lot of films that do a lot of the different elements of this film, but that it's quite another that does them all. So like this film, I think he's saying, he's saying that one of the reasons why throughout the whole article, he says like that people really love it is because it is unique in the sense that it has all of these qualities. Whereas like other people did like this quality or that quality or this and like this. And maybe that's because like the tonal issues that it has is one of the reasons why people are like, what is that? We can't put that in a box. It's trying to do too much. We don't understand what's going on.
Right.
But I thought that was a pretty good.
I love that comparison to Wes Craven. And maybe
Shocker,
that's what I was feeling. Maybe
even at the time. Yeah.
I'm going to give you in a moment. I'll give you my top 10 reasons why I love this film.
Yeah. Oh, good.
But I think that that Bloody Disgusting article really nails that. It's that Wes Craven suburban feel that I think many of us can relate.
It's a holdover from the 80s.
Yeah.
Right? All Steven Spielberg movies. Like it's that same thing.
And in some ways there's a sort of an isolation piece to it because it's this really beautiful small town. The movie never leaves the town. It never leaves the town. True. It really never leaves the street.
No.
Right? So you don't see, and this is something that you don't see in a lot of horror films. You're going to see all these exterior shots. You're going to see second unit stuff. You're going to see large cities. And especially now, everything just is so extra. And we were watching, actually, I'm not going to go on too much of a tangent, but the other night we watched The Inside Man.
Oh yeah,
and
it's on Netflix or something right now.
yeah, and I think we watched it on Stars, and
Oh sure.
we were sitting there going like, what happened to just these action movies that are just action movies? You know, they're not trying to be deeper than they are. They're not. It was just straight up action. It's a great movie if you haven't seen it.
It is.
And that's how I feel about horror like this, where it didn't have to go to such a level where you're trying to interpret, and it's like an interpretive dance. It's like, it's just a fucking slasher.
Absolutely agreed. And as a side note, I just watched The Beekeeper with Jason Statham.
Is it good?
It's an action flick. That's an action flick.
Yes. Okay, I'll have to add that to my list.
A tiny weeny bit at the
I like
very
him.
beginning, like Act 1. You know, you get why he's kicking ass or whatever. Like, you know, you set up a little something.
Yeah.
But no, it's just an action movie.
Yeah,
Like,
just like Heat.
thoroughly enjoyable. Yeah,
Heat is another one. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, it's long, but it's just an action movie.
Yeah, it's yeah. I would recommend that movie, The Beekeeper, if you like action movies, which I do.
And I think that, I'll have to check it out. I think that this movie represented to me one of the last horror movies that didn't move into this overly woke, like just, and again, I'm not even talking about like Jordan Peele's work and stuff. His stuff is spot on. The way he uses politics in his films is fucking brilliant. I mean, he has a talent that so many people don't. Talking about these really bad attempts since the beginning of like this new millennium, horror just started to take a nosedive. And I think one of the reasons why I've loved series like Terrifier and all of that, because it goes back to this.
Yes.
It's just horror. And I think all this other horror stuff is great and all, but if you read the reviews, a lot of that stuff is dying and we're going back to this. Real horror fans want a lot of this. Not to say that you can't embrace these other subgenres. I just don't consider them fully horror.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
So I will give you my top 10 reasons for why I love this film.
Okay.
So number 1, Edward Furlong was the tits at this time. Too bad. And then I said, too bad he ended up so messed up.
Yeah, that's too bad.
Number 2 is Trickster was an awesome villain, in my opinion. I think he was fun.
He was a lot of fun in that makeup and the hair and just the way
His body movements.
prowled around the room.
Yeah.
He just looked like he was having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I think you can really tell.
Yes. He had a lot of fun with that role. Yeah. Number 3, suburban horror was good because I was a teenager at that time and it was relatable, just like we were talking about.
Yeah, for sure.
Number 4 would be the makeup and the practical effects. Number 5 is it wasn't bad horror, in my opinion. I think it was a pretty good horror film. Number 6, Frank Langella, love him. And I loved that he was the head detective. I thought that was, and he's so creepy.
He's great.
So he brought a very like ominous presence, because that in conjunction with this soundtrack that was just the theme that had like that really deep bass, and his presence when he goes over to the house and there's a lot of silence when he's looking through the fireplace and all of that.
Yeah, for sure.
There was a lot of really good ambiance, and he brought that.
Definitely.
Number 7, I wanted Michael's bedroom. It was so cool. He was up in like that attic with all the really cool view, and then he had the amazing, like all the horror posters everywhere with the computer, and then his phone that he could just say, you know, Igor, dial blah blah blah. Call Kyle. Number 8, it hadn't yet utilized cell phones, especially in every scene, but it was definitely on the cusp of using technology in a horrifying way without it saturating the film. Okay. Number 9, fun ending. It was literally setting itself up for a sequel, which never happened.
Yeah, for sure.
And number 10, I really liked the town and the atmosphere of the film. And also it was Amy Hargrave's debut.
I know. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I did want to mention one thing that's psychological in nature, for those of you who listen to us for that. It's the character's name is Trickster, and Trickster is a Jungian archetype that represents certain things which are congruent with why this character was named Trickster. I imagine the Trickster is the architect in your life, and it can be a part of you, it can be a part of someone else in your life. You can have different friends and different people, and also different facets of yourself that come forward, and the Trickster sort of represents mischief and disruption and humor. A lot of times it's done with humor. It's kind of the part of yourself or the part of someone else or someone else in your life, Or think about this at work. Someone in your work life, if you work, sort of in a bigger setting, that is the person that agitates. So a lot of times we have agitation, because agitation, if you think of the laundry, if you think of a washer, agitation washes and it changes, right? It cleans, it changes, it forces change. So a lot of times you'll have an agitator, maybe an advocate that you can see there in a positive way, or someone just with an agitating character that will come in, agitate the cycle, to use the laundry metaphor, agitate the cycle, and then we are all forced to change. So there's a purpose for those things. And I see that in this movie. I also think that tricksters are often unpredictable. It's often an agent of chaos. A lot of people talk about it that way. And so if you think of the animal archetypes of the trickster, it's like monkey. Are you the monkey in the room?
Yeah.
Where is your monkey character? Monkeys will come in and throw shit at the walls. And they throw shit at you. They take their own poop and they throw it at you. Monkeys literally do that. And they're also chaotic. They're unpredictable. A lot of times you don't know what they're going to do. They go off. Certain kinds of monkeys are agitators. They force change in their environment. So it couldn't. I mean, they named it Trickster, for Christ's sake. It's literally right on the nose. I couldn't go without.
I love that.
I couldn't go without
because that's exactly, he was obnoxious as hell.
It's what he does, and he forces change, right? He's trying to force this kid to do all these horrible things, right? Yep. And to tap into his quote unquote true nature. I'm not saying the trickster has it right. The trickster is just a part of your personality that will agitate the fuck out of you to get you to move to the next piece. Like that can be also a representation of the trickster.
Got it. I love that.
Anyway.
Cool.
Jungian shit.
Yeah.
Should we do the old
Brainscan Facts? Where the Director John Flynn was not a fan of Edward Furlong. What was his biggest complaint?
Well, I mean, I read that he just didn't think he was a good actor.
He says, Eddie Furlong was a 15-year-old kid who couldn't act. Yeah. You had to slap him awake every morning. I don't want to get into knocking people, but I was not a big Eddie Furlong fan.
No. No.
He got discovered walking on a beach, by the way, and he had done zero acting, which is very clear. Mm-hmm. And his acting in this movie, I don't know how it got worse from the two that preceded, because he wasn't as bad in Pet Sematary 2 and Terminator 2, but there you go. Usually. So John Flynn.
And surrounded by better actors, like in this, he's the number one on the call
sheet.
He's
the center, you're right.
So that's a different vibe,
he's
man.
Carrying
better in an ensemble.
Yeah, with good actors. Okay. Number 2, the film was originally based on a computer game by the name of Brain Dead, Brain Waves, or Brain Dance.
I believe it's Brain Waves.
Yes, Brain Waves, and then later released as Brain Scanners in Europe after the film was released. Okay. Number 3, the film was such a critical and financial failure. How long did it last in the theater?
This one I don't know, but like a weekend?
It was pulled after 2 weeks. So the way, if you've ever worked in a movie theater, without going too much into it, is it'll start in a large theater, or a large enough, depending on what they think the income will be. And then depending on how it does that first weekend, then sometimes they'll either keep it there or they'll move it to a small theater.
Yeah.
This one kind of moved. It didn't start in a major theater. It started in one of the smaller ones, and then it just went into the smallest one, and before I knew it, it was gone. It was really quick.
Well, and we've all had that experience if we're, past the age of 25 right now or whatever. We've all had that experience where like our favorite movie, it disappears.
It's like, wait a minute, it's already out of the theater?
Wait a minute, what happened? Yeah. The numbers did not get the numbers.
The film clips used to represent the fictitious film Death, Part 2. The film being shown in Michael Brower's Horror Club are from what real film?
Wasn't it some Dracula movie?
Yeah, the Dracula Saga, 1973.
Okay.
And then how old was Jamie Galen, who played the role of 15-year-old Kyle in the film?
Well, I know he was an elder.
Yes.
I don't know, like 25.
27.
Okay.
So he was actually, Eddie was the only one who was his age.
Teenager.
Amy and Jamie were in their 20s. Or
Amy and Jamie?
Amy Hargraves, maybe she was like 19 or 20, and then Jamie was 27. So she might have been like 22. I don't know, but he was
Fair
the only
enough.
teenager.
Yeah, 27. That makes sense. I mean, that's pretty much how they used to do it. I mean,
Yeah.
now they have a lot of young actors but they're often absolutely in their 20s even now, like on all the, the CW dramas and all that. And they're often older, much older than being in high school.
If you are an Eddie Furlong fan, before we end today, and you haven't seen Detroit Rock City, do yourself a favor. That's a really fun one.
That's a super fun one.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So.
Do it. Kathy said so.
Yeah. I'm still a fan.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Terror Talk. My name is Shannon.
And I'm Cathy. Sleep safe, everyone.